There's something out there waiting for us. And it ain't no man.
Don't you even know how to be a real Indian?
Well, sometimes they have to kill us. They have to kill us. Because they can't break our spirit.
Hey everybody, it's Ian, and welcome back to another episode of Native Film Talk. Hope everyone's having a great day. So, quick story, I decided I was going to record on the road. I was in San Diego, sunny San Diego, gorgeous, gorgeous weather, high of 70, low of 61 every day. Like, it never fluctuated more than 9 degrees. It was insane. I had such a great time. And I brought all my podcast equipment with me, and I didn't record there. I'm back in Phoenix now because I freaking left my charger in my bag. At least I thought I left it at home. And so when I was typing up my notes and my battery was low, I'm like, all right, cool, record tomorrow. It was Wednesday. I'm like, I'll record it Thursday, push it out Friday. We'll be good to go. And I go in my bag and couldn't find my charger. And I stuffed my bag full of my podcast equipment, full of everything, and I couldn't find my charger for the life of me. And I'm like, well, shit, I guess I am not going to record. And so I come home, and I unpack my bag. Where's my charger? It's at the very, very bottom of my bag. So I could have recorded, but I didn't. It's okay, though. We're here. We're here talking about it. So what are we doing here today? We're talking about something important, something really having to do with where do we go from here? Where are we and where do we go from here as Native people, as representation in film and television? What does it look like? Why does it matter? And the Hollywood Diversity Report is a good place to start with that, at least have a conversation about it, because the Hollywood Diversity Report came out in 2014 for the first time. So this isn't something that's been around for too long. It's a study done by UCLA when it just looks at data every single year, twice a year. So it's a biannual report. One, in the fall, the television report comes out, and in the spring, the film report comes out. And when you look at this in 2014, the very first report, it's really trying to find the correlation it's really trying to make the case for why diversity matters in Hollywood. So it's looking at the top grossing, really the top 200 films and top 200 TV shows that are going on. And they're saying, all right, let's examine these and let's see how the demographics line up with the bottom line. For those of you that don't know what the bottom line is, the bottom line on an income statement at the very, very bottom. So you have the very bottom line. It's what is your net income? Are you making money or are you not making money? It's your profit and loss statement, your bottom line, your net income. After you have all of your revenue and all of your expenses, all the money you made, and all the stuff you got to pay for, what's left over? And based on all of that, how does that correlate with minority representation? How does that correlate with non-white male representation? Ultimately, that's what this report is trying to look at and examine, is does it really matter? Does it matter to have non-white people, non-male dominated movies? Is it okay to have that? Does it correlate to higher potential for income? Are people showing up for that? We talk about it, but is it really important enough to say, yes, it does matter? I'm not going to get into the numbers as much into this diversity report, but short answer, if you want to go and look at it, type in Hollywood Diversity Report, UCLA. Short answer, it does matter. It matters because, and for the main reason, and what I really appreciate about this report is one of the first things in the 2020 report that they produced is U.S. population share, white versus minority. They're really white versus non-white. The population share from the 1960s to now is drastically different. And in 2050, 50 years, that's 30 years from now, not 50. Jesus Christ. So in 1960, it was an 85-15 split. the majority of the population in the 1960s was white, or at least white identifying. I'm not sure how they did that, but that's the census information. Now you can say there's a lot of information, a lot of issues with how census, there's a whole lot of controversy with how the census was taken, how it used to be taken in the past. So that 85-15 split, I refuse to believe there was only 15% of the United States was a minority in 1960, but that's what the census information showed. Now, in 2019, it's pretty darn close to 60-40. 60% of the population is white, and 40% of the population is non-white. And based on the projections of the population growth by the United States Census, it's going to be 53% non-white and 47% white in 2050, which is about 30 years away. Why is that important? Well, that's important because what are we consuming at this moment? Is it representative of the change in the demographics over time? And the answer is it's starting to, but for the longest time, no. The answer is no. And this report dives into very specific areas. The variables that they're looking into when they do the analysis are the racial status of the lead talent, gender of the lead talent, overall cast diversity, show creator racial status, show creator gender, writer diversity, director diversity, the genre, and then they break it all down by genre. They break it down by, hey, okay, now that we see there's diversity represented, how does that translate to actual awards? So they look at Emmy Awards, they look at the Nielsen viewer and social media ratings, and they look at network executive in the C-suite, in the corporate area, the corporate C-suite demographics of like, okay, the people who are running the movies, great. I like this report because it's very comprehensive, and it's evolved since 2014 when they first started doing this. When they first started doing this, it was very much a first cut at it. They were like, all right, here's what I think is a good way to look at it. Let's look at leads, let's look at directors, and then let's kind of see how that correlates with just other demographics. But over time, as other people have funded this report, other major entities have begun to fund this report and have vested interest in the outcome of this report and the data. The analysis has gotten more in depth. So why does it matter that you're looking at the gender of the lead talent? Well, because you want to see, are we casting minorities, but are we also casting women in the same manner that we are men? And historically we have it. And you look at gender inequities in just pay, and you look at gender inequities in leadership, and there's a disparity. It's like that with gender, it's like that with ethnicity, but this report does a good job of breaking that out. And I also really like that they don't stop there. They look at the writers. Just because you have ethnic diversity in your cast, in name, doesn't mean that the content itself is actually diverse. You could have a lot of black faces and brown faces saying words that don't represent the black and brown community. You could have Denzel Washington, you could have Lou Diamond Phillips up there saying stuff that doesn't represent, their communities. And that happens. So I like that they look into the writer diversity, they look at the director diversity for the same reasons. What lens are you looking at when you're looking at diversity? And then they look at showrunners, and then they go as high as the C-suite. They look at the executives, the people who are funding, really looking at the long-term vision, because that's ultimately what an executive does. An executive is not concerned about the short term. The higher you go in an organization, their whole purpose is the longevity of the company. So they're concerned about the bottom line, yes, but also the future bottom lines. How can we make it so we are set up for success in the future? How can we protect the integrity and build a foundation of our bottom line so we have a constant increasing stream of revenue, or we're going to reduce our expenses so we can keep coming up, on the right side of really the positive. So we have positive net income every single year. So that's what they're concerned about. So when you're looking at diversity in the network executive level, does it matter? Yes, it does. It absolutely does matter. Because if you have a bunch of white dudes sitting around a table and they're being pressured to include diverse talent, they're only going to do as much as they need to. because they may or may not have the right idea of what diversity is. And I'm gonna talk about that a little bit. But I really think this report has done good. Right now, the executive, I can just say the executive C-suite, it's all white. It's mostly white and male. But that's not a knock on the film industry. That is America, United States as a whole. That is, that's going to change eventually. Most of corporate America, most of the C-suite is white male, and that's just how it has been for a long time. And I think over time that's going to change. But this report has been, I will say, so I did kind of a longer intro than I wanted to on this, but I don't want to go into a huge in-depth analysis of everything that's non-native, but I want to talk about really some major points of like, what is this Hollywood diversity report? So I kind of did that. And then why is this important? Does it help to know this information? And I see a big problem, a big hurdle, and I'll talk about that. And then where do we go from here? So first off, the diversity report, it's bad. It's bad for natives, specifically. When you look at it, when you look at all the other ethnic groups, and you look at other and you look at male and female, that gender disparity, it's really improved from 2010 to present. When you look at show creators by race, it's kind of the same. But when you look at leads, specifically leads, the people that are the face of the franchise, the ones that they end up putting on the actual, on the poster, the one that they pay the big bucks, that's changing. What's interesting, though, when you look at where it's changing, it seems to only be changing in film and not so much in television. When you look at lead actor by race, from 2011 to 2020, it was a 90-10 split, basically. It was white and minority, 90-10 split. Now in 2020, it's like a 60-40 split, still white over minority, but it's gotten much better. And I will say this report started coming out in 2014, and it was 87-13, and ever since that year, 2015, 2016, it finally starts to press. And that's where everything is great in this report, is that when you look at lead actor by gender, it was really 75% to 25%. It was male, female, dominated by males. In 2011, as far back as 2011, for the top 200 films every year. And now, in 2020, it's damn near 50-50. And you can look at when this Hollywood diversity report came out in 2014, it matters. I really think that in 2014, it was still 75-25, and every single year it's gotten closer and closer to now where it's a 50-50 split with the highest grossing films, the highest performing films every year, and it's getting better in television, but television is still lagging. And I think it's interesting to me that Hollywood has paid attention to this, because when you look at why this is all important, when you look at who pays for this, when in 2014, when the Hollywood Diversity Report first came out, it looked like a grad student made this report. I mean, and that's not a knock on the quality. I'm sure the quality is about the same in terms of material, but just the presentation of it. It's not as clean. It's not as crisp. It looks like a final project, like somebody's thesis. Like, it's not that impressive, the look of it. The data isn't all that polished. Like, the data visualization aspect of that report is very bland. It's just bland. I mean, that's the best way I can say it. But when you look at from 2014, the first year that it came out, to now, holy shit, it's a well-oiled machine now. The first page of the report, you have logos, huge logos, and it says financial support in 2020 was provided by Walt Disney Company, Netflix, NBC Universal, Hulu, and the Latino Film Institute. Telemundo also is a huge sponsor. They have these huge logos, company logos, on the first couple pages all over this report. So these companies understand. It's undeniable now. The bottom line is affected by your participation or lack of participation in diversity, in diverse hiring, diverse casting, and diverse show running. So if you are refusing at this point to give the reins to individuals that are going to tell diverse experiences, then you're going to be behind the curve, and you're potentially losing out on opportunity financially. And that's, I think, what this report is showing, which is great. The fact that you have Walt Disney, Comcast, NBC Universal, you have Telemundo, Netflix, Hulu, you have them funding this report every single year. One, tells you it matters, but two, tells you that though the competitors of those companies are now going to have to measure up to where they are. And I firmly believe that Rutherford Falls, Resident Alien, Res Dogs, this isn't a coincidence that they all come out this year. When you look at these numbers for this show, in this Hollywood diversity report for Native people, it screams underrepresented. Screams underrepresented. For movies, so let's just start with film. It's already bad. So let's look at. Okay, so first of all, I will say this: the very obvious reason why natives are underrepresented in this report. We don't even get our own category alone to talk about this, because the major ethnic categories that they use, race ethnicity categories they use: white, black, Asian, native, Latinx, black Latinx, multi-ethnic, multiracial, and MENA, which is Middle Eastern or North African. There's a caveat to only one of these, and that is native. And that is, the native category contains global indigenous peoples, including Native Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Native New Zealanders. And I can already tell you that Taika Waititi is probably going to make up all of those numbers. If it's not Taika, then we got zeros across the board. They don't give specific titles to all of the films that they're measuring in these. They just say the top 200 films by really revenue. Top 2 films by, so really revenue for the year. But when you look at the share of film leads by race in 2020, it's bad. So they measured 184 total films. There was one role where there was a native, using that term native. There was one role where there was a native male as a lead, and there was one role where there was a native female as a lead. And that's all they got. And then the share of all film roles by race, there were a total of 1,400 film actors that they used to count this by race and gender. There were 4 total for native and men and women, male and female. And it gets even worse when you go to film directors. Directors, you have 185 films that they measured in 2020. None of them were native. Even as broad of a category as they made it, native New Zealander, native New Zealand, and native Hawaiian, Native American, they didn't even fit that. There were also 0 native film writers in 2020. There were 0 film writers that were native. And I think that in itself, for just film says like, hey, there's a problem. There's a problem there. And so when you look at Rutherford Falls, Res Dogs, Resident Alien, I don't think it's a secret as to, I shouldn't say, I don't think it's really a surprise that it happened, because it's no better in television. It's the same thing. It's zeros across the board. I'll actually say it might be a little worse in television because of that broad brush that they use, because of all the roles that they have in television, we make up 0.2% of the roles, which is basically means we got one person. If you're looking at 1,000 roles, we have 5 people. And that's what it was. Actor counts by race and gender for TV. There were 4 native men and 1 native female. And that was it. And it doesn't get any better. Writers at zeros. In 2021, it's going to be better, because you have, Tazba Rose Chavez, who is native. You have Bobby Wilson, who is native. And they are writers on shows like Rutherford Falls, Reservation Dogs. And there is native talent in Rutherford Falls, Reservation Dogs, and Resident Alien. So the 2021 report will look much better when it does come out for television, and well, for television only, I would say. I think it's interesting that we're making all of our strides just in television. All these successes, even Molly from Denali, fantastic show, animated children's show that's out of Alaska. But once again, television. We have yet to see this like big leap in film, and I think we're still building. I mean, there's not films that come out. There's Blood Quantum, The Body Remembers When the World Broke Open. So there's clearly recent films that have come out that showcase Native talent, that are run by Native people, that are written by Native people, but they're not hitting this top 200 that really is gonna, in top 200 in revenue or viewership, that is gonna make this list. And I'm okay with that, honestly, because Native people, we find that, we go and seek that out. And I don't know if those movies are, I mean, yeah, every director wants a multi-million-dollar budget, but some of these directors, they just want the money to be able to make the movie that they want to make. And if they can make it on a shoestring budget, then that's all they care about. They just care about the content. That's what they should care about anyway. And so I think when it comes down to it, we're making progress on all fronts, and I think that's encouraging. And so really, the next part that I want to talk about is what next? What next? Why is this all important? All of this information is good information to have, and to see the trend going in the positive direction is obviously a good thing. However, where is the precipice? Where is the promised land? I think the promised land is a BET-like station for Native people. And APTN, Aboriginal People's Television Network in Canada, I think is the perfect example of what we need, but I don't think we're ever going to get in the States. Unless there's some billionaire philanthropist that decides to say, hey, there's a big gap and there's an opportunity to present or really give Native people a platform to present content to their people that resonate with them, that because there's such a void in what is being presented right now, I think that would be awesome. I just don't see that happening. I think where we go from here is leveraging talents in YouTube. You look at Sterling Harjo, Dallas Goldtooth. You look at the 1491s. This is a prime example. That's ultimately where I'm going with this. The 1491s, while Sterling Harjo was already a prominent filmmaker within his own right, he had already been in the Sundance Institute. He had already kind of done a lot of things in film prior to the 1491s. The 1491s gave him an opportunity to take his show on the road. The 1491s became a road show after they became a YouTube sensation. Because when the Wolfpack came out, the Wolfpack auditions, the Twilight Wolfpack auditions, that shit went viral in Indian country. And it even went outside of Indian country, and non-Native people watched it for the humor, and they saw it for what it was. It was making fun of it, making fun of the idea that you are casting ridiculous notions of Native people. That's what you're trying to cast in that movie. And they were so in tune with so many different levels of comedy with that one video, and they kept making videos. I mean, that wasn't their first 1491s video. They had already done them, but that was the one I think most people really resonate with, because that's what drew them in as fans. That's what drew them in to watch their back catalog, that continue to tune in every week. And eventually, 1491s became a road show, and eventually they were essentially stand-up comedians. They went on as a road, basically, comedy troupe. And I saw them once in Albuquerque, and that's what they did. They basically did a stand-up routine, and they showed their YouTube bits, and they would tell stories about it. They would show their YouTube bits up on a projector and in front of an audience, in front of a live audience, and then they would tell stories, and they would tell jokes, and they'd work out material. And so you have people turning into comedy writers, whether or not they were comedy writers before. They turned into comedy writers in front of our eyes because of YouTube. Because of YouTube. And now Bobby Wilson, he is a comedy writer. He's an official comedy writer now. And so I think it's important for things like YouTube to be out there. For Navajos, we have Boney Warpony Productions. There's Aunt Beatrice that are out there. There's a lot of people that are out there producing Native content, and we might not view it as Yeah, it's not film, it's not television, but we don't necessarily need to just have those two avenues to feel represented. You know, there's like Frank Wallen that produces awesome music. Tatanka Means brother. Why can't Natani Means? He's a native rapper. There's a lot of people out there that are producing relevant content for native people. It's not just in film and television. And I'm not saying that film and television representation doesn't matter. I'm just saying that I think for natives, because we make up such a small percentage of the population, 1.3% in the most latest census, and that's not broken down by any of the segments of Indian country. That's just Native American as a big bucket, 1.3%. In what world are you going to do anything to make money to cater to that 1.3%? And I'm not going to back down from that statement for people that are saying like, well, that's why we need more native content to get it in front of people. You tell that to the other 98.3% to give, or 98.7% to give a shit about that 1.3. That's just not how the world works. I wish it was. There are going to be people that, you know, are going to be legitimately about the cause for native people, and the rest are going to be bleeding hearts. They're going to say they care, but when it really comes down to it, they're not going to lay their neck on the line for native people, for native voices, for native platforms. So we got to take the reins ourselves, and we got to show out. And when we get opportunities like Res Dogs, when we get opportunities like Rutherford Falls and Resident Alien, everybody's got to fucking show up. We're 1.3%. Is that enough viewership alone to keep a show like that going, to get it in another season? It might be. The amount of content that is produced on all of these streaming platforms today, 1.3% of the population, that's a shitload of people. So we definitely have enough people to really keep shows alive and to show that there's interest. And I think by continuing to show up for Rutherford Falls, Reservation Dogs, when it comes out, Resident Alien, I think it's important for us to show up, watch it, tell people about it, tell people why it's awesome, do reaction videos online, write pieces, you know, submit it to people like Slate, Esquire, RobertEbert.com, opinion articles, editorials in the Boston Globe, New York Times, even, you know, your smaller level travel newspapers. Write about why this shit matters. Write about why you feel like it's seen. Like, why you feel like you're seen when you watch Rutherford Falls. Why in the first episode, when you see a kid wearing a Landback t-shirt, you're like, holy fucking shit. That is amazing. That's what we need to be doing. And I think that's awesome, because the big problem, and this is the big problem, and this is outside of just film and television. The big problem is when you're challenging an industry that has a diversity problem, whether it's racial or gender diversity, they're only going to do what they think diversity looks like. And so you need to dictate to them through the bottom line what diversity looks like. And that is, we make more money when we do this. We make less money when we do this. If you leave them to their own devices, they're going to do what they think diversity looks like. And what they think diversity looks like is dipping their toe in the direction of, we're going to add more we're going to add more ethnically ambiguous people. We're going to add more black people. We'll add a few more writers. And if just doing that small incremental change, that moving of the pawn pieces kind of motion, if that doesn't change the game, if that doesn't add to the bottom line, or worse, it hinders the bottom line, they make less money, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to backtrack. They're going to take their pawn back, and they're going to say, whoop, that was a bad move. Didn't mean to do that. But really, that's what we need to be doing. And so that's why when the Hollywood Diversity Report looks at diverse representation in the executive C-suite, that's why that matters. You have a brown person at the table or a non-white person that's sitting at the table, they can tell you like, whoa, that's what you think diversity looks like? The fuck's wrong with you guys? That's why you need diverse voices. But I also think the big thing is diversity isn't just diversity in skin color. And I think there's a huge misconception in corporate America around what diversity looks like. And I still think there's a lot to be said about really aligning on a definition. Diversity to me is diversity in experiences and thought. And yes, by virtue of having a good mix of gender and a good mix of racial people, a good mix of gender and races, you're going to have a good mix of diversity in thought and diversity in experiences that can help you get to where you want to go as a company, that can help you make decisions that are going to be, one, representative of the people that work for you, but two, actually doing something that matters. And I think that's where we're heading in the right direction in television. I can tell you that. With people like Sterling Harjo at the helm, with writers like Tasba Rose Chavez that are just out there killing it, showing up. Sierra Ornelas, with Rutherford Falls. I think these people are critical in getting us where we need to go. And I think as Native people, we need to fucking show up and watch it and review it. Something as simple as leaving a review, leaving a 5-star review. Every little bit helps. Every little bit helps. I really believe that. But I think the big problem is that's the only way it happens. Frankly, I really believe that's the only way it happens. That's the only way we continue to see Native content like that is if we show up. Because I really think that when I mentioned the moving the pawn piece forward and dipping your toe in the diversity pool of, let's add a Native showrunner. Let's add a Native writer. If it doesn't work out, they're like, I guess we don't need to do that anymore because clearly it doesn't make us more money. Clearly it doesn't make us better. And you're really going to rely on people's goodwill of just like, no, it's a good thing to have Native writers. Yeah, it doesn't work out, but unless your talent is undeniable, and I'm not saying Sterling Harjo, Tasba Rose Chavez, Sierra, Ornelas, I'm not saying none of their talent is undeniable, but you need to be undeniable and you need to have the support of the people to continue to make the content that you want at the stage that you want. So we need to keep showing up. Because I'll tell you what diversity looks like, really, in corporate America. It's browner at the bottom and the top stays the same. And really the top changing is instead of all white men, you're adding white women to that mix. And that's a very unpopular thing to say out loud for a podcast, but you talk to any minority person working in corporate America, that's what it looks like. You look at the rank and file, you look at the front line, you look at frontline leadership, you see minority representation, you get to middle management and executive management, it looks very different in terms of racial diversity. The racial makeup of your C-suite, your executive and middle management is very different than your frontline leadership and your frontline employees. And that's just where it is in America right now. We're in the process of changing that. I mean, you look at the census projections in 2050, non-minority people will outnumber white people in this country. It'll be 52-48 split based on the US Census projections. So eventually it's going to change. It's just like, do we really have to wait to 2050, to 2070, 2080 for it to finally change? And I think the film industry is a little bit different than the typical corporate America because this is artistic expression. This is entertainment. So people are going to show up for what they want to be entertained by. And I think Natives, we can really show up in a big way. In a big way. And so this Hollywood Diversity Report, let's go back to this last part of kind of like where do we go from here? I think the Hollywood Diversity Report is important because I believe because you have big name sponsors, Walt Disney, Comcast, Telemundo, Netflix, Hulu, eventually Amazon Prime is going to jump on board. HBO Max is going to jump on board. They're going to see like, hey, our competitors are supporting this, or let's support another university to get them funding so they can do this. Not in response to the UCLA Diversity Report, but maybe thinking, hey, what is another way you can look at diversity that can help us produce more relevant content? Because eventually this diversity report is going to hit a peak. They're going to get to a point where it's just like, you're going to get to a point of diminishing returns just because you can only have so much representation in every ethnic group. If you made it equal across the board, let's say you made it, what would be a good split? Let's say you made it 10% and you had 10 different ethnic groups in America, and you even gave natives 10%, you'll naturally find a balance. You give it like a 10-year run of finding of like, okay, we need less of this group, we need more of this group. We need less of this group, more of this group. It's kind of like a mixing board. You're just going to end up throttling things up and down based on the content. But also, it's not just by ethnic group. Like, it's the power of ideas. When you have diverse people sitting around in a writer's room, sitting around behind a camera, directing something, you have diverse experiences sitting there, that's when you're going to get the best content. When you have people that are like, hey, I work best. Perfect example is Sterling Harjo. He's awesome. He's great. He's going to be looked at as one of the GOATs for Native people, for Indian country. But you'd be lying to me, I guess, if you didn't tell me that he has more fun writing, sitting in a writer's room with Native people, more so than non-Native people. Even if you have the quote-unquote best in the industry that they'll surround him with. There's just shit that Native people can talk about and joke about and write about that you can't do with somebody else who might be one of the most prominent, non-Native writers in the world. But just because they're the best doesn't mean that they're the best for the person that's sitting in that room. And I think that's where the future is making the best teams that have the most synergy, not necessarily getting a team of all-stars. We see it across the board in sports all the time. Just because you got the best talent doesn't mean you have the best team. And I think that's what this diversity report is trying to promote. It's just like, hey, you're limiting potentially the opportunity for content that's going to affect what people are going to show up to see by just having one ethnic group running the show, by having one gender run the show. Like, mix shit up, man. That's what this whole report's about. So let's talk about where we go from here. I think where we go from here is, well, what I say, I think it's APTN, the equivalent of BET for natives. And I think it needs to be done on YouTube, frankly. That's the programming exclusively for Native people, made by Native people. Why on YouTube? Well, because it's low budget. It's as much or as little money as you want to put into it. You've seen Boney Warpony Productions. I bring that guy up multiple times. Just go watch one of his videos. Just type in Boney Warpony Productions, watch one of his videos. You'll see what I mean. It's low budget. It's great content. It's humor filled, but it's freaking relevant. You watch that and you're just like, man, 1491's another prime example. You watch that and you're like, wow. That's that's building a portfolio of talent for one, but also, and I think the most important thing is you see YouTube stars left and right getting deals because of how many people show up to watch their content. And they're like, that person has notoriety, that person brings an audience, let's put him in a movie, let's put him in a TV show, let's put him in a commercial spot. That's how you do it, my opinion. Because perfect examples, the two I think of, one that I kind of grew up with and aged with in YouTube was Ryan Higa. That dude is like next level. That dude can show up to anything now. Well, not anything, but he might be a little bit older and aged. But when like in his prime, I'd say like 5 years ago, that dude could show up to anything and he would make money. And it's same with Liza Koshy. She has a great YouTube presence, or had anyway, and now she has her own show. She has such a draw that networks pick her up for stuff, and that's what happens. And I think that's lightning in a bottle. That's rare. But you're telling me that natives can't do that? You're telling me that there's not a native person that can make a draw like that and do that? It's bound to happen. And I think that's maybe the path for us at this point, is to start there, but also just end up riding the coattails of people like Sterling Harjo, like Tasma Rose Chavez, like Sierra Ornelas, and get them on board to say like, hey, get them to vouch for somebody. Like, hey, I know you like working with me, but here's another person that you would love to work with. Because frankly, APTN did that. APTN vouched for people. APTN, the Aboriginal People's Television Network, I mean, the proof is in the pudding. You look at the big name actors in cinema, the ones that we're all familiar with: Michael Greyeyes, Irene Bedard, Adam Beach, Graham Greene, Gary Farmer, Martin Sensmeyer. What do they all have in common? None of them are from the lower 48. None of them. Wes Studi is an anomaly. He's the only one that's really from the lower 48. But now we have shows like Reservation Dogs is finally breaking out of that because it's a non-native person. Or, I'm sorry, it's a native person running the show as opposed to a non-native person. So they're not going to pick from the same pool of talent because Sterling Harjo knows there's plenty of great native actors out there that I can choose from. Anna Lam's another one, not from the lower 48. And it's just Kate, Devery Jacobs, another one, not from the lower 48. There's so many great native talent, so much native talent that's being taken from above the lower 48. And I'm not saying there's a problem with that, but I think there's definitely a correlation there. And I think that for some reason, people in the lower 48 don't have the same platform. But I'll go ahead and wrap this up. I think what I'm hoping for Res Dogs and Rutherford Falls, I hope we show up and I hope we show out and I hope we get more seasons, because every race, not every race, but other races and genders have gotten their at bat and have had their people show up for great content. Crazy Rich Asians, Black Panther, movies like Ocean's 8, Ghostbusters, where it's like an all female cast, Captain Marvel, Wonder Woman, even shows like Always Be My Maybe, where it's a different type of show run by different people, and it's showing that, hey, you give the other groups a chance and they'll fucking kill it. Fresh Off the Boat is a perfect example of that. If you haven't seen Fresh Off the Boat, you watch that and you see exactly what I mean. But even that, you see that's where, Christina Wu got her, Constance Wu got her at first at bat. She was on Fresh Off the Boat before she was in Crazy Rich Asians, and that's prime example of what we need to be doing. We need to be just getting people at bat so people can see their talent on display, whether that's on YouTube, whether that's on APTN, or whether that is on a TV show like Rutherford Falls or Reservation Dogs. And the Hollywood Diversity Report is good, but I think when you're looking at the top 200 of anything, natives are just not going to be there. Just because it's not. And if we are, it's probably going to be for something that we don't want to be a part of. It's going to be some Avatar shit. It's going to be some Dances with Wolves shit. It's going to be something that we were a part of, but we didn't run it. We were a part of it, but we didn't have a voice in the direction. We had a voice, but we didn't have influence on the direction. And so I really think that the direction that we want to go in is running shit, and running shit at any level. It doesn't need to be the most expensive thing, but it just needs to be running it. And I think that the great thing, the optimistic thing, is Netflix, Hulu, Disney, Comcast, they all see the value in diversity. They see the value in putting stuff out there that matters to different ethnic groups, and they will. And we just got to show up for each other. That's what it comes down. That's what it comes down to. Is we got to show up for each other. Can't be stuck up about it. Can't think we're better than it. Can't think like, oh, that's just cheesy. Fuck that. Watch it. Show up for it. Write reviews. Talk about it to your non-native friends. Tell people about Rutherford Falls. Tell people about Resident Alien. Tell them about Blood Quantum. Shit, even tell them about this podcast. Just to tell somebody to talk about representation. All right, everybody. Well, this was kind of an off the cuff, a little less notes heavy episode. But I just wanted to come and talk about the Hollywood Diversity Report, what it showed. Really, it showed that we're non-existent, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. For the top 200 movies every year, for the award-winning shows, the fact that we're not there, I'm okay with, because it's changing. If I did this episode a year ago today, I would be doom and gloom. I'm not gonna lie. Having those shows out there now, where there are native writers, where there is native showrunners, I'm just like, okay, well, I feel a little bit better about the direction. In 5 years from now, I do not want to be talking about the days of old where it's like Smoke Signals 2.0, like, oh man, you remember in 2021 when we had Rutherford Falls and Resident Alien and fucking Reservation Dogs all at the same time? Man, that was the shit. Sucks that they only all lasted one season. That's not true. Resident Alien did get second season. But you know what I mean? It's like I just don't want that to happen. That's my biggest fear. But I really think that the people that are paying now for the diversity report, or at least helping finance, they see the value in representing, in getting accurate representation and getting diverse talent in and around these movies. And I'm excited about the future. I think before this podcast started, before I started this show, I was less optimistic. But now I'm pretty optimistic about where things are going, and I hope everyone else is too. If you got a different opinion, let me know. I really appreciate everyone for listening. If you get a chance, please leave a review on Apple Podcast. I'm still trying to figure out how I want to do my YouTube videos. I'm going to get on that soon. But all right, everybody. I'll talk to you later.